speaker today is Beverly Henderson from the East Lauderdale Historical Society. She's going to talk to us about the different records that they have, different things that you can do there, things you can research. She'll be talking about the historical markers over in the eastern side of the county, and just has a wealth of information to give us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Miss Henderson, and then I'll see you again whenever she's done for just a moment.
Thank y'all for having me. Brian made it sound like I've got lots to offer, so I'm hoping there's a few things y'all pick up on today that you could benefit from. I am with the East Lauderdale Historical Society. Please, if you're on Facebook, look us up. We do have a Facebook page, and kind of keep up with some of the things that we're doing. We were established in 2011 and got our nonprofit designation in 2012. We put up our first historical marker in 2013, and today we have put up 21 markers. And next Saturday we'll be putting up our the 22nd. So we're looking forward to that, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. We meet in Rogersville at the Rogersville Senior Citizen Center. We meet once a month on the second Thursday of each month, except in December. We know it's just too much going on during the holidays, so we just don't even try to meet in December. And would appreciate anybody that's interested to come on out and join us. What I'm planning on doing is kind of giving you a brief overview of each one of the markers that we've put up. I created a handout for you today, which is a map that has all the locations of the markers that we currently have, and also the last one is the future one that we'll be putting up. So you can plan you a Sunday afternoon drive, go out and find all these and read all of the information that are on them. Now, one thing that we do different than any other historical marker organization that I know is most of the historical markers that you see has the same information on each side of the marker. I never understood that because there's just too much information to put out there. So none of our markers are that way. Every one of them has to be continued on the second side. So we have lots of information on our markers, and we have a lot more information that we'd like to put. So you really have to concentrate and squeeze down the information and kind of stick to the facts when you're doing these markers, but there's so much more information out there. As far as the research that we do, the library here is a wonderful tool. They have access to so many good resources for you to do research. Of course, the courthouse and the land records. There's a lot of online access. Newspaper articles are great. And we rely on each one of our members to help out in the research. So a lot of times somebody will volunteer to do research on a particular marker and kind of pull that together, and then we kind of try to help fine tune it. So we need researchers. If you know anybody in that end of the county that you think that would be interested in helping us do some research on some markers, please send them our way. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and start with the first marker. The first marker that we installed May 4th of 2013, and that was in Elgin. And I also put the name Elgin Crossroads on there because to most of the older folks, they know it as Elgin Crossroads or even just Crossroads. That's most of you probably know it's at the intersection of 72 and 101. This marker is located behind the Shell station there in front of the Methodist Church. So you have time to go by and read that one. It talks about the other names that it had. It originally was known as Marmion, M-A-R-M-I-O-N. It also was known as Ingram's Crossroads, Crittenden's Crossroads, Elgin Crossroads, and Elgin. During the Civil War, it was Crittenden's Crossroads. You can go back and look at records when the soldiers were signed up, and it'll say they signed up at Ingram's Crossroads, but it's actually Elgin. Gabe Butler was one of the earliest residents or the earliest settlers to move in. He came in the early 1800s. His name was on the petition, on the Doubleheads Reserve petition of 1809, so they asked him not to be evicted from Doubleheads land after he died. And of course, he was forced to leave, and he went on up into the edge of Tennessee, and then moved back here and bought the land. Most of them that happened to, they moved back and bought the land that they formerly had leased from Doublehead. And so he did that in 1818. And where he settled, he was hoping would be near where the Florence to Huntsville Road would be, and he missed it by a mile and a half. So he's a mile and a half north of the Blue Water Bridge there at 72, is where he originally settled. There was a school there, and it operated until 1985. The old sign and the lunchroom is still there, and the people of the community saved that, and Miss Olita Tage really headed that on up, and it's now the Senior Citizen Center. Miss Olita Tage was a teacher there at Elgin Elementary School for 40 years. All right, the next one we installed was for the Springfield community and the Springfield Church and School. As you can see, on one side of the marker, we put Springfield community, and on the other, Springfield Church and School. So the Springfield community is just a short piece up 101 toward Lexington, right where County Road 76 comes in. That area was once considered as a county seat. So, but of course it didn't happen, but it was considered that. Also, because there are so many springs in that area, it was a good training ground for soldiers. So a lot of the Confederate soldiers actually were trained in that area, which is where it got its name from. And then there was also a church and a school there. And the one thing to note is the first church that actually was eventually moved there was about a mile and a half south of there, and it was called White's Chapel. And then they moved it up to where the current church is. But something interesting to note about White's Chapel is I have an ancestor that was a writer. His name was Charles G. Butler. And he put in one of his writings that Frank James actually taught at White's Chapel while he was scoping out the area for the payroll master robbery that he eventually did, where, as most of you in history know, that the payroll master was going to pay the guys that was working on the canal at the mouth of Blue Water Creek. And he was going to rob that payroll master. So a little bit more about that later. Also, another thing to note there, and this may have been at other schools, but I just remember the stories my mother told me because she and my grandfather both went to that school. There was a little building behind that school, and the county extension office would come out and they taught them how to make cotton mattresses and how to preserve food and other things that they needed to know back then. And I'm going in the order that we installed these. The next one was the Hugh Pate Harris marker. Hugh Pate Harris was a general in the U.S. Army. He was commissioned as he was promoted to a 4-star general on March the 1st, 1964, and he was the 66th officer that obtained that rank. He was born in Anderson, just a little north of town, but early in his life, his family moved to Lawrence County. And in his life, he retired in 1965 and became the president of the Citadel, the military college in South Carolina. He died in 1979 and is buried in Arlington Cemetery. And if you want more information on General Harris, they have a lot of information at the Old Jail Museum in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. If you've never been to the Old Jail Museum, it's a treat. So if you find yourself in Lawrenceburg, look them up. This one is located at Anderson Park, right on Highway 207 there. The next one was the Rogersville Presbyterian Church in the USA. It's on Lee Street, but it's on the part of Lee Street that comes out onto 72 across the entrance of Joe Willie State Park Resort. So if you want to turn on that road to go into Rogersville, you'll go past this old white frame church. It's a beautiful church, and people in the community are trying to keep it up, and I'm so thankful for that. But that was that area. There was a church across the road actually that started out in the brush arbor in the old Liberty Cemetery, which is across the road from this church. And then later, Since it was one of the oldest churches, a lot of times other organizations and other faiths will worship in the same building. And there was actually a document of a deed that was deeded to tenants in common for the Methodist Episcopal Church, the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, the Continental Presbyterian Church, the Sons of Temperance, and the Freemasons. So all of those people would use that church. That church later burned, and they built the church that's now there in existence. And the Presbyterian Church of the USA actually worshiped there until 1974. But the nice thing is, Rogersville still has events there. They do a Yuletide ceremony in December. The next one is the Lauderdale County High School. It was the first high school in the county. And because of that, there was people from the west end of the county that would want to go to high school. And so what they would do is the residents of Rogersville would allow those people to do room and board just so they could attend there. I always thought that was really interesting. But prior to 1912, there was a school there, but this school was actually built in 1907 when the state decided that each county needed a high school. And the nice thing about Rogersville is Governor O'Neill went out there in 1911 and assured the community that the county high school would be built. And then the next one was the town of Anderson. This one is located right beside the Hugh P. Harris marker there on Highway 207, right in front of Anderson Park. Anderson has a lot of history in itself, and how it got started is Mr. James Anderson settled there about a mile south of town, and later other people, Booker Foster and Jess Williams, settled there and built a cotton gin and a water mill. So it was a up and coming area. The first post office was established in 1860 with A.D. Ray as the postmaster. The first church was Hurricane Springs Primitive Baptist Church, and there's a cemetery there, the old Anderson Cemetery there. Graves there date back until to 1841. If you're on 207, you go just north of the restaurant there. It'll be up on the right, and you'll be able to see there's lots of really old. The Farmers Bank was the first bank there in 1926. Anderson was incorporated in 1973 with Mr. Turpin as the mayor. Now there was a school there for many years. Unfortunately, it wasn't a high school, it was a junior high and an elementary. And the junior high closed in 2011 and the elementary closed in 2014. The nice thing is that there was somebody that came in and bought the property, and it's now operated as an event venue. So they've at least preserved the structure. Next one is the Samuel Burney. This one is located at First Creek, and it's on the north side of Highway 72. Out of all of them that we've installed, this is the one I like the least as far as where we had to mount it, because unless you're really paying attention, you do not see it. And the reason we had to install it so far off the highway is Highway 72 has changed locations right there so 3 or 4 times. And so the ground is so hard, we were not able to actually dig a hole until we could get off of the edge of that. So we may move it one day, we just hadn't figured out where to move it to. And when we started working on this marker, we found out that First Creek was originally known as Burney's Creek because Samuel Burney, he was a Revolutionary War veteran, moved there and leased land from Goldhead in 1808. So that creek was known for him and his family. And sometime when the canal system was coming through, we just suppose that's when the name of the creek was changed to First Creek, because the next creek down is Second Creek. So I guess it just made sense for it to be First Creek. We don't know. But Mr. Samuel Burney was there, and he was a farmer and a justice of the peace. He died in 1849 and is believed to be buried in that old Liberty Cemetery there in Rogersville. On the other side of this marker, we talk about the Burney Creek, just the story I just told you, and also First Creek and Wheeler Lake. We'll go ahead and give you these details. Some of you may already know, but before the construction of the dams, the water dropped 137 feet over a distance of 37 miles from Browns Ferry to Florence. That created the Muscle Shoals. so it made the Tennessee River unnavigable. So the first canal opened in 1836 and closed in 1838. It was just a failure from the beginning. Then the second canal was 14.5 miles long with 9 locks and opened in 1890. Lock 1 was located at the mouth of Bernie's Creek, also known as. The next one was the Covington, Second Creek, and Good Springs Church.
Beverly, can I make one statement here
Yes.
about the first creeks?
Yes.
I believe there's 3, possibly 4 first creeks in Lauderdale County. So you have to kind of distinguish
Which
which
one?
one you're talking about.
Right. I agree. I think that's the same case with Second Creek. I think there's another Second Creek
Yep.
down toward Waterloo. Okay, this Second Creek is between Elgin and Rogersville. And that marker is located, there's a causeway there and a little round mound area before you go across the bridge there at Second Creek, and that's where we mounted that marker. And if you stand at that marker and look north at that bank, and in that water is where this little town of Covington was. It's hard to imagine now because the Wheeler Dam backed up the water in there and flooded all that. But there was a farming community there. I remember a story about hay being cut there, and a gentleman that was running the tractor, his daughter came out to bring him some water or something, and she was cut very badly because he didn't know she was coming in, and that was just a sad story. I don't know why I chose that. And also, further down the creek, since that was Delta area, that was great farming land, and the people that had raised corn and other crops were really mad when they backed up that water. They can't sue the government, so unfortunately, they didn't have a say-so in it. The highway then, of course, ran through about the middle of that lake, and there was a bridge from that last point over to what's now the boat launch. So once that happened, then they had to build a current highway, and it was only a 2-lane highway at that time for Highway 72, and in the 1970s, it was 4-lane. And the next one is about Center Store. It was originally spelled Center, C-E-N-T-R-E, and it's because it was on the U.S. Postal Service route that started in the rural areas and went by star routes. So it was evidently the center of that star route. Of course, they changed the name now to Center, C-E-N-T-E-R. This one's actually located right in front of the First Baptist Church Center Store. So that one is really easy to get to read. The post office was there. That area had really rich soil and was farmed first by the Indians, and then it had several plantation owners like the Phillips and Taylor and Cunningham Plantation, Douglas and Williams, and communities near there is Bellevue, Big Oak, and Houston Town. The oldest active Methodist congregation is located there, and it first started at the mouth of Blue Water Creek and was known as Driscoll's Chapel. There's a historical marker in front of that Methodist church that you need to stop and read too. We did not do that marker, but Mr. Ronald Pettis did. He did that marker, and he also did one for Lock 4, and it's at the right in downtown Killen, where the Killen Church of Christ is. There's a marker there for Lock 4. Lock 6. Center Star is where Captain Edward A. O'Neill organized the Calhoun Guard. It was later designated Company I, 9th Alabama Infantry Regiment. O'Neill was promoted to Brigadier General and later became the Governor of Alabama. Another thing to note, Ronald Pettis did a book on Company I, 9th Alabama Infantry Regiment. So if you ever get a chance to get that book, it's got a lot of really great information. There was a school there and thriving businesses as well. So it was a popular area. All right, the next marker is about Mitchelltown. Oddly enough, we have 2 markers for the community of Mitchelltown. Once we completed the marker that we wanted to do and we wanted to put it in front of the funeral home there at Elkins East Chapel right on Highway 72, so more people would be able to stop and see it. But then the residents of Mitchelltown really wanted one down in what was the community of Mitchelltown. So they raised the funds, and we helped to write another marker, and we installed one down there. So the first one talks about Jack Phillips, who lived there, and he lived right there where the funeral home is, and he operated a mill on Mill Creek there. John Robert Mitchell joined Captain O'Neill's Cavalry Guard there in Center Star, and he married Jack Phillips's daughter. So that little area was named really after him, and they called it Mitchelltown. The Blue Water Primitive Baptist Church is there, along with the cemetery. And another odd thing about the schools there, the first school that they had was on Dog Branch. My grandfather went to Dog Branch School. It was later changed to New Hope School, but I thought that was interesting. Who would name the brand Dog Branch? Anyway, there was a major business complex on Mill Creek there, right in downtown Mitchelltown, which is where County Road 76 comes in to County Road 33, which is the road that goes by the funeral home. It had a merchandise store, grist mill, blacksmith shop, sawmill, cotton gin. It was a really big complex. And I know there's other communities in the area that had those kind of complexes, because people couldn't just take all their goods to bring it to a big town like Florence to do business. So each little community had these big complexes. So Mitchelltown was a big deal back in the day. It ran until in the 1950s, and in 1960 it got tired and collapsed. And they said that people from miles around could hear it. The other marker talks a little bit more about that, because Clarence Hurston was the last person that actually operated the gym. And then some of the family names in the area is like Joiners, Deans, Holden, Ray, Collier, Tate, Jackson, Walton, Scott, and Hurston and Butler. Captain Mitchell and his wife is buried in the Phillips Cemetery. If you're coming from the funeral home, there's a road just a little down, about a half a mile, I would think, and you turn the left on. It's called the Phillips Cemetery Road, and it dead ends into the cemetery. Mr. Shannon Phillips tries to keep that cemetery up. The next one was Lambs Ferry Road. It's located in front of Rogersville Town Hall on Highway 207. During the construction, this is the intersection of two major Indian trails, the Simpsey Trail and the East-West Trail. They intersected there at that area. It was later widened. It led from Spring Hill, Tennessee, through Pulaski and Minor Hill and down to the Tennessee River. Mr. John Lamb, a Scots-Irish Cherokee, relocated here from Indian Creek in Charles County, Tennessee around 1809 and established a ferry there. And that ferry ran for over 100 years. And unfortunately was forced to close, of course. The dam was built and the water was backed up. And the section of that road from the light south is still known primarily as Lambs Ferry Road. It's County Road 91, but most people say Lambs Ferry Road if you're from the area. Okay, the next one was for Jesse James and his gang in the trial of Frank James. As I've already mentioned about the payroll robbery, that was during the construction of the second canal, and we put those details on this marker because the actual robbery happened not very far south of there at a place called Douglas Branch. So that's why we felt like it's actually located where the Blue Water Equipment Company is at the intersection of County Road 33 that turns south. And so if you stop and read that one, you can imagine that robbery happened not very far from there. I'll tell you this, is that Alexander P. Smith was the payroll master that they robbed, and the amount of money he had on him was $5,293.18. And they took him and the money and went up into Tennessee. They took his personal money and his watch. And after a little while, they let him go and they gave him back his personal money and his watch. And then he came back to town to tell all about it. And then the district attorney in Huntsville collected evidence to try to charge the James gang with this robbery. By the time they came around, Jesse James had already been killed by Robert Ford in 1862 in Missouri. William Ryan, one of the gang. He was in prison in Missouri. Dick Liddell, another one of the gang, was brought to Huntsville and found guilty. Then when they brought Frank James in, he was arrested in Missouri and brought to Huntsville for trial, and the defense attorney was Leroy Pope Walker. You may have heard that name before. He was a popular a lawyer, but he was also a former Confederate general and Secretary of War during the Civil War. Frank James was acquitted and walked out a free man until 1915. There's a lot of information out there on the internet about that robbery. Okay, the next one was we put in for Wheeler Dam. This one is installed just on the north side before you go across the dam. On the left, there's a little parking area there, and we installed that marker there so you can pull off easily and read that. And this has got a lot of detail, so I'm going to read most of this. Wheeler Dam is located 275 miles above the mouth of the Tennessee River at Paducah, Kentucky. It is one of 9 dams on the Tennessee River operated by TVA. It is 15 miles upstream from Wilson Dam and 74 miles downstream from Guntersville Dam. Wheeler was the first built by the TVA after Franklin Roosevelt created the Tennessee Valley Authority in January of '33. Wheeler was completed in '36 and named after Joseph Wheeler. Now there's a lot of other details too about the Wheeler Reservoir. It formed 9 reservoirs that created 652-mile stairway of navigable water from Paducah, Kentucky to Knoxville. TVA purchased 103,400 acres of land for the reservoir. A total of 31,228 acres had to be cleared and required removal of 840 families and 176 graves. Now, as far as the graves is considered, I understand there's a document upstairs in the local history room that tells you about the cemeteries and the graves that had to be moved by the TVA.
Can I make one statement about that marker?
Sure.
And the placement of that marker, you said it's just on the north side of the dam. We had to make sure that we put the marker on the road right away, because the red tape that TVA was going to run us through, just set it over a foot on the TVA land, was unreal. So we just backed it up and put it right at the edge of the highway.
And it sits real low, which is very, you can still see it, but it's kind of sitting real low. Another story I do want to talk about Wheeler and the Wheeler Dam there. And you may have heard this story about the Saturn rocket. The dam, they were adding another lock in 1961. I think they started that lock, and they dug into some, what I read, clay, and that lock collapsed. And so whenever the Saturn rocket was coming down, they couldn't lock it through because the lock was broken. So they had to build a loading dock on the east side of the dam, and they trucked it across the road down to the lower side of the dam where there's a fishing area now, and there's a loading dock there, but they offloaded it back onto a barge and sent it on its way. Now, you can go to both of those locations, and TVA has now put up plaques that talk about that, and they call it Wheeler to the Moon. So when you go across Wheeler Dam and take a left there where the Joe Wheeler Lodge has the little cabins, fishing cabins, take another left, there's some picnic tables and a pavilion up there, but it's just before you get to those picnic tables on the right, you'll see those plaques. And then when you go across the road down into the fishing area, you have to take that little sharp curve to the left, and it's just a little bit down there. You'll see where that loading dock is and those plaques there. So take a trip out there sometime, read those. All right. The next one was for East End High School. During segregation, this was the only black high school in the east end of the county. They also had one in the west end of the county. But before these were built, they had to be bused to Borough High School here in Florence. This school was located on what we call Lover's Lane in Rogersville. It's the same road if you go down Limsbury Road, you'll take a right on that road, and it actually comes out onto the same road that the park entrance road is on. So that's Lover's Lane. And we installed it at what then was Lover's Lane Park, but it's not, it's now been sold, and it's no longer a park, but the marker is still there. And like I said, it was the first high school for African American students in the East Lauderdale County. Prior to this, junior, senior high school students had to be bused to rural. And it was located on 17 acres of land. It was built in 1952 for grades 1 through 12, with William M. Ford being the principal. In 1954, there were 178 students in all grades. Over the years, there were 213 graduates. Integration began in the 65-66 school year, and 7 former East End students graduated from Lauderdale County High School in 1966. The campus was sold in 69, and the buildings were demolished in 2017. Okay, and the next one is for Gabriel Butler, or Old Gabe. I've already mentioned him when I was talking about Eldon, and he moved here. We installed this marker at Butler Cemetery, and it's near where his home was. If you are going from Killen to Elgin, right before you get to the bridge at Blue Water, there's a road that turns to the left, and you take that road all the way, and it dead ends at the cemetery. And the marker is there, and there's our rock wall section, and that's where Gabe Butler and his family is buried inside that rock wall. There's a lot of history on Gabe Butler in the area, and multiple descendants of his that's here in Lauderdale. And the next one was for, I've already mentioned, the Liberty Church and the Liberty Cemetery. The first church there at Liberty was a log structure that replaced a brush arbor that was there in 1831, and the church became part of the Flint River Primitive Baptist Missionary group in Madison County. It was the only church in Rogersville prior to 1841. In 1854, 112 members led by Jesse Seal, who also served at the Round Island Church. Round Island Church is in Limestone County. They recently put up a historical marker there too. The cemetery was the first public cemetery, and it began around the church. And at least 200 people are believed to be buried there. And all of these citizens helped Rogersville grow into the thriving community it is today. The namesake, Andrew Rogers, is expected that he is buried there, but his name was spelled R-O-D-G-E-R-S. So in the beginning, when Rogersville started, it had a D in the name, but of course later they dropped the D and just changed it to the Rogersville. But this Andrew Rogers, his daughter and her husband's buried there, and they actually have a monument. There's so many in that cemetery that doesn't have markers. So we don't really know for sure who all is there, but we do know one of the oldest known graves there was of a 2-year-old, William Lansford, who died on September the 17th, 1837. So that's a pretty old one. And also, as I mentioned before, Samuel Burney, we expect that he's buried. And the next one is about the Elk River Shoals. I'm not going to say a whole lot about it because I already talked about the Mussel Shoals, how long it was on that. But that marker is actually located right before you go across Elk River Bridge on the right. So you need to stop and read that one. And the next one is the early history of Lexington. Lexington is a really old community. There were several veterans of the Revolutionary War that moved in there, and that's where we think the name Lexington actually came from. And where it kind of got its start was on Second Creek, the same Second Creek that comes out of Elgin. It's way up in the waters of Second Creek up there. And there was a watermill there ran by Edward Poteet, and some of the early settlers would come in there, and before they could build a home, they needed somewhere to stay, and they would actually dig out caves at the banks of the Second Creek there and live in those little caves until they could get a house built. And that area started to become known as Dugout. So if you've ever heard of Dugout, that's where it was, and that's where it got its name. The original location of the actual town, though, was on Mill Creek there. When you're coming through Lexington on 101, you pass the town hall. You can look down to the right, there's some girls softball fields down there and everything. There's the little Mill Creek there. That's about where it was. Mr. A.L. Phillips lived there, and he was pretty instrumental in establishing a lot of the businesses there. There was a general merchandise store, grist mill and a gin and a flour mill. He also was responsible for the town's first bank in 1917. And when you're in Lexington, when you pass the town hall, there's a old white house there. It's got a wraparound porch, and that was Mr. A.L. Phillips' house. There's an historical marker there for him too, that somebody else. And next one is First Baptist Church of Rogersville. This one is located on College Street, across from the school, actually. And it kind of ties into the old Liberty Church information, because that's where the Rogersville Baptist Church got its start, was at the old Liberty Church. So on October 15, 1841, for about $1 an acre, for an acre lot, they purchased some land there close to where the church is now, in the name of the United Church of Jesus Christ. A brand new church building was completed in 1842. In 1865, the Baptist, the Methodist, the Presbyterian, and the Church of Christ all met there over the next 25 years. In 1906, the Rogersville Baptist Church was organized there and joined the Lauderdale County Baptist Association, and the current sanctuary was completed in 1992. I think that was probably true for a lot of communities, that if there was a church building there, it probably served for a lot of different faiths to meet, and probably other local organizations to meet, probably the town council, and who, because there just wasn't the money to build all the buildings that we have today. The next one is also about a church. Most of the time, we will do churches if they're very historic churches. We haven't put up a lot for churches, but these two we did. This one is Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. It's on County Road 71, like you're going to Lexington. It's called the Old Florence and Lexington Road. It depends on which end you're on, I guess. If you're in Killen, where it comes off 72, you say it's the Old Lexington Road, because that's where you're going. And it started out in Lexington in 1854 in a home in Lexington. There were 31 charter members. In 1875, it was moved to a building at McClure Springs. And if you know where the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church is now, McClure Springs was behind it. And they built a building there, this is really interesting, that it was 40 feet by 25 feet. And the local folks nicknamed it Old Scrouge Out, because evidently it was small and it was always packed when you went to church. And there's also a cemetery there, still remaining, that you can't get to. It's on private property unless you know somebody. We're blessed to have Hugh Smith here today, and he always gets out and finds all the local cemeteries. He's the cemetery man, and I think you told me at one time that you had been to this cemetery.
Yes. With permission, of course.
With permission, yes.
No.
Right. All right. Then in 1905, a tent revival was held where the church is now, on County Road 71, a large, wood church. And it was originally part of the Liberty Baptist Association. It became a charter member of the Lauderdale Baptist Association in 1932. There was also a school there just south of the church building there in Mount Pleasant. It was called Williams School, and it operated from the 1890s to the 1940s. One thing, key thing to know about Mount Pleasant Baptist Church is that they do have their own cemetery. And there's a very important person buried there, U.S. Army Don Leslie Michael, SP4, Bedmont War Congressional Medal of Honor, is buried there. He was born in Lexington on July 31st, 1947, and died at Huron on April 8th, 1967, at the age of 19. Okay, this one, I don't have a picture of the marker yet because we're still finalizing some things on it, but this is the wording pretty much that it was. This is the marker that we're going to be installing next Saturday. It's about Camp Drake, which was a Boy Scout camp, and Joe Wheeler State Park Negro area. This was at the entrance to the now resort area. When you go in there and you get to the boat launch areas where we're going to have the ceremony, then the state park was over to your right. It was, my understanding, it was the only black state park in the state, and that when the people come up from, like, I guess Montgomery, looking for where to put this park, they found the people in Rogersville would be so nice that they decided to put the park there. And also regarding the park, the first park ranger was Mr. Fuqua, Howard Fuqua, and the second one was Samuel Hart Sr. And they're also, the state park is going to go ahead and honor him by renaming one of the walking trails there after Samuel Hart Sr. Saturday also. I think that's really nice. Now the Boy Scout camp, Camp Direct Boy Scout camp, it was where the day use area is now there at the resort. And it was for the black boys that was in the Tennessee Valley Boy Scout Council. And then this was all, of course, prior to desegregation. Once desegregation happened, they all went to Camp Westmoreland, where it is now. I've heard a lot of good stories about that, and also Camp Drayton was named for its benefactor, the fourth president of Alabama A&M University, Dr. Joseph L. Drake. That's primarily all of our historical markers, so I'll go ahead and open the floor if there's anybody that has any questions.